Welcome to this week's episode of Insider. I'm Mayan Hoffman, executive editor at ILTV, and I'll be your host. A young rabbi was murdered by terrorists in the United Arab Emirates. Canada's former justice minister was the target of an Iranian assassination plot. Violent protests filled with chants of death to the Jews and calls to burn Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu erupted across Montreal. A recent survey by the Jewish Federations of North America revealed that nearly 25% of U.S. Jews experienced anti-Semitic incidents in the past year, while 75% overheard or saw anti-Semitic comments in person or online. Less than 100 years after 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazis, it's starting to feel unsafe to walk the streets anywhere in the world, even in our own Jewish communities. Even in our own Jewish state.
Utilisait la psychologie, à droite, à gauche, etc. Là, c'était l'humiliation par la douleur, l'humiliation devant les enfants, devant les amis, devant les parents. Il y a une intention là qui dépasse encore celle de la Shoah.
Is there a Jewish safety crisis? How did it get this far? And what can we do to stop it? Joining us to discuss these urgent questions are Dov Ben Shimon, CEO of America's Community Security Service; Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel and founder of the State of Tel Aviv; and Pierre Rehov, documentary and filmmaker and creator of Pogroms, the source of the clip that you just watched. Let's get started. Vivian, I actually want to turn and start with you. We saw scenes over the weekend that were deeply disturbing in Montreal, scenes of effigies, as you said, of the Prime Minister of the State of Israel being burned. What has changed in the last decades? Canada used to be a place that people thought was safe.
Well, first of all, I think that people are learning that perhaps it wasn't always quite as safe as they thought. October 7th unleashed a lot of violence, anti-Jewish violence, the world over. In many ways, it seems to be worse in Canada, and there are reasons for that. There are big differences between Montreal and Toronto, but both are very, very anti-Semitic. There's a lot of violence, there are a lot of threats, and the tone, in my view, is from the top, and that means the Prime Minister of the country, who since October 7th has excused this kind of violence as peaceful protests and people just exercising their constitutional freedoms, their right to free speech and to protest. And he's wrong. It's not either one. They are neither peaceful, nor are these people exercising their constitutional rights.
Do you think the people agree with the Prime Minister? I know there's an election relatively soon. Do you think that things will change?
Well, we know things will change. There's actually an astonishing poll that came out yesterday. In Canada, for all kinds of regional complexities, 40% of the vote for a particular party means a majority government. It's a parliamentary democracy. And the Conservative Party is polling 47%, and the Liberal Party is down somewhere like 16. They govern now. This is unprecedented. These numbers are crazy. There are so many reasons that there will be a change in government. I don't think anti-Semitism is the top reason. I think the top reason is that the economy has been destroyed by this government as well.
Wow. Now, Dov, I do want to turn to you. The U.S. situation is actually not much better. For instance, at the University of Rochester, we saw students hanging up posters, wanted posters for a number of people on campus. How does it feel to be a Jew in America today, and why do you think anti-Semitism in North America has escalated so substantially?
Thank you, Marianne. It's good to be with you. I want to be careful first about how we let a crisis and our adversaries define us. We have seen a significant rise in Jew-hating attacks, especially, but not only since the October 7th attack last year. But our adversaries don't define us, and Jewish life in the US is still vibrant and compelling and dynamic. And at the same time, there is this wave of hate, this hatred of Jews that comes from the right and from the left, from Islamic extremists and more, that threatens our people and our community, and we have to be prepared now more than ever to stand up to that hate and evil. Why has anti-Semitism in North America escalated so dramatically? First, I think you framed this exactly the right way. It's escalated. But I can tell you that we've seen attacks on Jews throughout the years, and it's important to point out that it's not a new phenomenon. I should say I'm thankfully not an expert on the causes of anti-Semitism, and my understanding, I should think, is similar to yours. But my honest assessment of why this escalation comes is from three factors: hate reinforcing algorithms on social media, a growing number of people who hate Jews, as Zionists, as whatever, who aren't properly deterred when they begin to act on their evil inclinations, and a lack of security protocols and procedures in place to keep Jews safe.
Now, your role at the Community Security Service is to ensure the physical safety of Jews in the U.S. But last week we saw, for example, Rabbi Kogan in the United Arab Emirates being kidnapped and murdered by terrorists while grocery shopping. Could a similar incident happen in the U.S.? Is there anything we can do to prevent such tragedies from occurring elsewhere?
Yes, it could absolutely happen. And we have a responsibility to make sure that we do everything we can to prevent it from happening. That means building local security networks for every Jewish community, regardless of size. It means training volunteers to act as force multipliers, the first line of defense in every community, to identify problems and connect to law enforcement and security teams. It also means stronger communications, risk assessments, and training programs, especially on situational awareness and emergency procedures and threat identification. We have teams, not only in hundreds of synagogues, not nearly enough, by the way, but also at large Jewish events and community gatherings to boost this mission of protecting Jewish life, defending the Jewish community, and at the same time, empowering Jews to take security as a personal responsibility.
Now, Vivian, Canada doesn't have a similar organization to the CSS that Jove is leading up in the United States. We just mentioned, Erwin Kotler, who was a target of a potential Iranian assassination. How are Jews in Canada feeling safe? Who's actually protecting them?
So I'm not sure exactly what CSS does and is, so I'm not really in a position to comment. But we have different organizations in Montreal and in Toronto and in various cities. I think that each city kind of takes on its own security issues and tries to deal with them. But overall, we rely upon the police, and that would be the municipal police. And what we've seen, particularly in Montreal and in Toronto, is that they seem more inclined to protect the pro-Hamas demonstrators and supporters who are violent, who, we've had firebombs, we've had Molotov cocktails, we've had gunshots, we've had beatings, we've had it all. And we've had virtually no arrests, but Jews have been arrested. So the police, there is a real, after last weekend in particular, both in Montreal, what went on, and in Toronto, the arrest of a Jewish journalist while a Hamas wannabe was cosplaying Sinwar's death in the middle of a Jewish neighborhood on a busy Sunday. And the police arrested the Jewish journalist, who was peaceful, and they didn't touch these people who were screaming the most vile, grotesque anti-Semitic slogans. So we don't really feel that the police are protecting us.
So then in some sense, nobody is.
And exactly, and it's important to add that we saw the Amsterdam pogrom a few weeks ago. We have in Montreal the riots. We have Ezra Levant being arrested in Toronto. We also have a Montreal rabbi walking downtown with his family, and the police told him, get lost because you're a provocation. And they're all changing the narratives. In all these cities now, they're saying it's the Jews' fault. Mm-hmm. They caused it. Amsterdam, Montreal, the mayor, and now in Toronto, all the authorities are saying these disturbances are because of the Jews.
So I'm going to stop you there because actually that relates to Pierre, who has been sitting here very quietly. But Pierre, you have a very interesting theory going on. You released a documentary called Pogroms, which is actually looking into the historical context of the October 7th attack and what really led up to it. Your ideology the ideology that you speak about says that this was fueled by an alliance between the Islamists, the KGB, and the Nazis, all aimed at eradicating Jews in Israel. Some might dismiss this as a conspiracy theory, but what evidence supports your argument?
We have a lot of evidences. First of all, we all know that before World War II, in the 20s and 30s, the leader of the Palestinians, the Arabs of the region of Palestine, Haj Amin al-Husseini, was a Nazi. And he had connection with Himmler, and then he went to Berlin. He was expelled by the British. He went to Berlin, etc. We all know the story of Haj Amin al-Husseini. He was the first Palestinian nationalist, so to say. And among his plans, he wanted to build a copy of Auschwitz beside Haifa. He wanted to kill all of the Jews of the Middle East in concentration camps looking like Auschwitz in Haifa. Now, we also know, because of the Paseba papers and because of many people from the former KGB and other communist countries who escaped to the West and told the story, we know that Yasser Arafat was not born in Jerusalem. He was born in Cairo. He was a gangster in Cairo, and him with Nasser, who wanted to be the leader of the entire Muslim Arab world, and the KGB together, they came up with this idea, fantastic idea. Why don't we create a people that didn't exist, the Palestinian people, and make the Jews invaders and colonialists.
And so now here we come to today, and we have an October 7th attack. And you released this film, which is supposed to give a historical perspective and also share some footage from the 7th. And yet Amazon, very similar to what we heard from Vivian, accusing the Jew, Amazon has blocked the documentary, for example, among others, because they said that it is, I believe it was violent content.
Yeah,
so what's
there's no violence on Amazon, right?
Right, so explain, what's your perspective on this? Why would a documentary of this kind be blocked? What do you say?
Because at the top of every one of those platforms and every media around the planet today, there are people who are either woke or, extreme left wing or whatever, and they all have the same agenda. I mean, they prefer their ideology over the truth, over what is actually going on. So I suppose, I'm not talking about the head of the Amazon, but I suppose the person in charge of buying decided the film was not for them. And that's how Amazon didn't take it, and with the usual excuse, which doesn't mean anything. I had the same problem also with Apple TV, but only for some regions, and I had a problem also with Google Plus, only for United Kingdom. United Kingdom didn't want the film at all.
So, Dov, I want to turn back to you because your organization has been working to secure Jewish communal spaces in the U.S. for a number of years. How much has been invested in this effort over the last decade, and are there measurable results, such as preventing, let's say, synagogue infiltrations?
We're not invested anywhere near enough for the size and scale of the Jewish community, for the wide range of the threats that we face, vandalism, harassment, online physical attacks, and for the importance of training and empowerment. And yet, at the same time, without going into operational or specific details, I'm deeply proud that there are thousands and thousands of CSS volunteers, for example, who are out there protecting and defending Jewish life and the Jewish way of life. They have detected hundreds, thousands of incidents of suspicious activity, stopped attempts at harming Jewish community members, and worked with law enforcement to address security concerns. If I may, I want to add one point of pride. I went the other night to several different training programs that we run in one large Jewish community in North America. And I was watching bad kids, secular people, conservative and Orthodox and Reform, all together learning about security and their own personal responsibility to give back and to protect the community.
But Dov,
training college kids.
I'm sorry to stop you, but Dov, at the same time, I mean, you're going through all these trainings and you're bringing everybody together, but doesn't it a little bit take away from the spirit, the openness of religion and Jewish life to not be able to celebrate without an armed guard or people trained with guns inside the facility?
So, firstly, I didn't say trained with guns. Guns is a separate issue altogether. This is about self-empowerment. This is about seeing these amazing, inspiring people, young and not so young, men and women from and all denominations, who take a personal responsibility for Jewish communal life. And it's a sense of authentic community responsibility that says, we have to do this. We have to take control over elements of our own security and safety, and it's a responsibility for all of us.
Now, Vivian, in your perspective, how has the global response to anti-Semitism, particularly from the Western governments, evolved over the last decade? I mean, is it programs like CSS that you're hearing being implemented and funded by the governments? Are there other initiatives? Are there countries or leaders that are taking stronger stances or weaker stances in order to ensure any safety, maybe different from what you're unfortunately seeing in Canada?
I think Canada's just perhaps at one end of the spectrum, the wrong end of the spectrum. I don't see any coherent response. I think that we see a lot of ostriching, burying the head in the sand and pretending it'll pass, it'll go away. In the Western countries, Western liberal countries, the core cause of the problem is similar. Okay. And it is a rapidly increasing Muslim population that has been migrated to these countries in previous decades. For many of those people have not integrated into their communities, and they bring values that are very clearly hostile to Jewish people. And that's what we're seeing. Those riots in Amsterdam, that Jew hunt, as they called it on their WhatsApp groups, many of those people who participated in hunting and beating Jews, they're second, third, fourth generation Dutch, but they're mostly from Morocco. And that's not me sort of spewing hate. That's information straight from the Dutch authorities. So I don't think that we can look around and say there's a coherent strategy or approach. I think it's a dog's breakfast.
And Pierre, do you agree with what Vivian's saying? I mean, your roots of anti-Semitism, as you described them, go a little bit deeper. So do you think it's a migration of the Muslims, or is there something else going on?
Well, I would say that in the Western world, after the Holocaust, films calmed down a little bit because they consider maybe they went a little bit too far.
Totally.
But in the meantime, the Nazis invaded, escaped from Nazi Germany and went to a lot of Arab countries. You had Alois Brunner, for instance, who became a Muslim and helped the Egyptian government to recreate an army and also train to terrorism and all that. I'm giving you just an example, but there was also anti-Semitism, which is inherited of the Prophet Muhammad himself, because, for instance, Arabs say very happily things like Kebar Kebar, and talk about a place that was conquered by Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, and where he killed actually most of the Jews over there, and because they refused to convert to his new religion. So this is within the hadith of the life of Muhammad, etc. But today they consider that as they say all the time, Kebar Kebar, O Jews, the army of Muhammad is going to return, which is one of the famous sentences we say all the time. So this anti-Semitism was diminished by the fact that they were taking non-Muslims as what we call dhimmis. Dhimmis is somebody who was protected by Islam, but doesn't have the same rights as the Muslims.
Understood. Now, we are going to run out of time soon, but I do want to ask all of you a very important question. And Dov, I'm going to start with you. If you had to propose one concrete action to combat anti-Semitism, whether through education, policy, security, what would it be and why?
I would say that a proactive approach to security, making a plan, reaching out, training your community members is the highest priority for American Jewish life today. It's about protecting Jewish life, defending the Jewish community, and empowering Jews to be secure.
Pierre, what about you? If you could make one policy change, if something could happen, based on everything you showed us in your video, which I hope people do check out the documentary so they can see the history and see the story and understand really in detail. It's an incredible documentary. I did have a chance to watch it myself last night, and I'd love to have you, be able to. I'll share the link in our YouTube channel afterwards. But please, what would be the policy that you want to implement?
I believe in victory. We are dealing with predators. They smell Jewish blood on October 7, and they don't have enough of it. So I think the only response is the total victory against them, not a halfway victory with a ceasefire and then we negotiate. A total victory, claim the victory, announce the victory, because I know pretty well the Muslim mentality, and now the Muslim mentality is what is spreading within the Western world, and it's a question of pride. Pride is paramount for them.
So total victory. And Vivian,
and the
I
total
want
victory
you
will stop them.
to be able to give the final sentiments here. What is the policy? What is the vision for what we can do to make this better?
I want to just be very clear about what I said earlier, that whereas I think Muslim anti-Semitism is the overwhelming problem in the West right now, it's not the only anti-Semitism, but it definitely is predominant. What's the policy response? I think, firstly, Jewish communities and non-Jewish communities have to actually see what is happening and not pretend it's going to pass. So we need to deal with reality, and we're not doing that anywhere. We're trying to explain, we're trying to reassure. So I would say, look at the facts, stop trying to explain them away, stop behaving the way Jewish communities did in Europe in the 30s. I'm not blaming the victim, but I'm saying that they made excuses, And then the solutions will flow, because they will be very apparent if we are actually dealing with the facts before us. And in Canada, one out of many countries, we're changing the government, so that'll solve a lot.
So hopefully that will solve the problem. I always feel like the show goes way too fast, and unfortunately, that's all the time that we do have this evening. I want to thank all three of our guests for being here tonight. For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching Insider. Have a safe and pleasant evening.